and tricks. My name is Don Hager. I'm a system consultant with InSource. I'm here today to introduce you to the ArchestrA graphics alarm object. Let's get started. Let's answer the question, what are alarms and events? And how does System Platform handle these alarms and events? The System Platform capabilities: automated detection, notification, historization of these alarms, and viewing of process alarms and events, and also software alarms and events as well. An alarm is normally a notification of a process variable or software condition that has went outside the normal operating range. An event is simply an occurrence of a condition at a certain time. Let's look at how ArchestrA handles these alarms. A platform can act as a single alarm provider that provides alarms to the InTouch distributive alarm system. A Boolean checkbox is provided in the platform automation object indicating whether it's subscribed to an area or the alarm and event reporting. The platform is responsible for routing all of the alarms and events for an area subscribed to by that platform to InTouch's distributive alarm infrastructure. Let's look at the layout of how this actually works. The Win platform is the one that distributes the alarms to the alarm control and the alarm DB logger. But before that, the objects are the ones that generate these alarms based on things being outside normal operations or events taking place in an object, an area, or maybe even an engine. And then that's routed up through the Win platform and distributed out to the clients. So the alarm DB logger gets these alarm notifications and it puts those into the database. That's our historization portion of that, so we can go back and look at alarms later. We can sort alarms and filter those alarms based on some criteria that we can apply. Then we have the alarm control that we're going to look at later, the graphical piece, where we can look at actual alarms, filter those, and look at how they're structured and how they come in depending on the system conditions, and we can analyze what happened before and after the alarm actually occurred. Let me now introduce you to the actual control and its runtime functionality. So the introduction to the alarm control consists of formatting and designing of the control. Then a user will have the ability to make the following adjustments as we see below. They can refresh the alarm control grid, so it's going to be a grid with alarm information. Using the status bar, we can view various information about the alarm record. We can acknowledge, we can hide and filter and sort these alarms as well. We can freeze the alarm display, so if there's many alarms coming in on an ongoing basis, we can freeze it at a particular point in time, and then we can start to look at the alarms at that time, so we can analyze them. We can switch between client nodes, so there's the actual alarms, there's events and history. We can vary how we look at alarms as well, or how we look at events. We can switch between languages as well. It has the capability of doing language switching. As I mentioned earlier, there's an active alarm display, which displays the active alarms and events. It allows for acknowledgement of alarms from any platform in the system. It also allows you to filter the alarms based on the hierarchical structure that the system platform configuration applies to those alarms and the areas that they're in. This is what the control looks like. It's a tabular layout, columns and rows, and then some of the navigation that we can add to it later on. Some of the current alarms, filtering by areas, control system, production, line 1, and we can also acknowledge alarms as well through that. As part of the active alarm display demo, I'm going to go through and build the functionality for you. We're going to put the alarm display on a window in a symbol, and we're going to have the navigation that we see to the right. So we can go to recent alarms, alarms, current events, and we'll be able to look at exactly what we want to see. And then once we're looking at the alarms or events in the way we'd like to see those, then we can filter those alarms and events based on the areas that they're coming from. Upon completion of the demonstration, you will have seen the use and configuration of the alarm client control to visualize and acknowledge the real alarms, and change the alarm query for the alarm client in runtime. As I mentioned previously, we can also use this to see historical alarms as well. And what that means is we query those alarms from the database. So remember with the flow that we had, where the system platform or the platform itself is the one that's distributing these alarms to the alarm control or to the database. So now once we have them in the database, then we can query those alarms out of the database, and we can show those alarms and events in the same control that we use for the active alarms. And we have the same hierarchical structure that was created in the system platform configuration. So the same control is being used here, and then we have the navigation over here to the side where we can do historical alarms, or we can do historical alarms and events at the same time. The historical alarm display demo will consist of adding another symbol, and then we'll configure it for historical alarms and events, and then we have the navigation, the drop-down menu on the side, where we can choose to see alarms, or just events, or alarms and events at the same time. Upon completion of this demonstration, you will have seen the use and configuration of the alarm client control to visualize historical alarms and events as well. As part of the demonstration, we're also going to look at query filters. And we mentioned query filters as we were coming through and describing what we were going to do in the demo. You can filter current and historical alarms by using query filters. And what you're doing is querying or applying a filter to these alarm criteria so you can get exactly what you want. For example, you might want to filter alarms and get alarm priorities for anything greater than 500 or anything less than 750. So that gives you a narrow window of priorities that you're looking at those alarms that occurred between those different priorities. So this helps you to analyze the alarms, and you can reuse these queries. They can also be built at runtime, and you can set up a library of favorite queries as well. And we'll show you how to do a couple of those as we go through the demo. So let's go do the demo. As I start the demo here, I would like to show you some of the architecture, some of the foundation that was laid before we get to the point of ever having any alarms or any control over the alarms. As I was going through the PowerPoint and showing you the filters that we could apply, this demo is built on a training application we do in one of our system platform classes. And you'll notice that we have the control system, we have the discharge, the intake, and production. Control system and production matches up with what we have in the PowerPoint. Then under that, I have line 1 and line 2. So those all match up with our filters that we built inside of the PowerPoint. So this is going to match up exactly with what we've shown you. I wanted you to see these areas because they're going to be very important for our filtering. That's what we're going to use to filter the alarms. So under line 1, we have mixer 106, and then we can get any alarms we want from any of these objects by subscribing to line 1. Or if we subscribe to line 2, we can get any of the alarms from mixer 206 and any of the objects that are under that. So they're grouped in a way based on how you've built the hierarchy structure. And if we subscribe to production, we get all the alarms from all of the objects that we have here. I wanted you to see that part so you can see how the structure is actually built. And then as part of this demo, the first thing we're going to do is go create a new symbol that we're going to use to actually display these alarms, the actual alarms and the historical alarms. So let's go do that. Okay, we're going to start here in the graphic toolbox. This is where our symbols are created, and you can create your own symbols in here. The software itself comes with hundreds of symbols that are built in that you can use, and I'll show you a couple of those. For example, like analog meters. And if we hover over those will show the analog meters. So those are thumbnails of meters that are available in the system, gauges, things like that that are built in, that you have out-of-the-box functionality with some beautiful graphics. In this case, we're going to build our own graphic. We're going to build a graphic for the alarm display. So the first thing you'll notice there is I have a couple of different display lives and a couple of history that I've already built. I'll open up the display live. I did the live 1. The ones that have a 1 on the end of it are the ones that I did previously and are fully functional. If you see I hover over those, you get the alarm display. I'll go ahead and open up the live 1 so we can look at it. It has the client object already on it. It has a combo box for us to navigate between alarms and events, or events and alarms together. Then we have our filter navigation built in here, so we can filter based on our areas that I showed you earlier. I want to go back and build one from scratch to show you how that's done. So I'm going to start with the live display. The ArchestrA alarm client is actually on this tool template here, and it's the one over here to the very left in the corner, the alarm client. So I double click on that, bring it over into the area, and I can drop it on the screen. And then I resize that, and we go in and double click on that, and we're going to configure this. One of the things that we need is an alarm query. In this case, we've got 5 different modes that we can have for client modes, and this one's going to only have 2. It's going to have the current alarms, recent alarms, and events. So that's what we're going to configure this one to use. In each case here, we need an alarm query, and the syntax for this alarm query is \galaxy, exclamation point, in this case control system, \galaxy, and production. There's a space in here between the 2 areas. So we're going to get the alarms from control system, and then there's a space. Then we're going to get the alarms from production as well. So those are our 2 queries, as we talked about having queries in the PowerPoint presentation. Now we need some navigation so we can switch between the active alarms and then the recent and event. And just like with our object here, we double click on that to configure it. The first thing we need here is a reference. This client object that we put on the screen, it has some parameters that allows you to interact with that object. So by using this combo box, we can interact with the object and we can select what it's going to display. So the first thing we need to do is get that mode parameter in here as our reference. So I click on the ellipsis here, and I'm going to be able to browse the properties of that. So we're looking at Alarm Client 1. I want to show all of those, and I want to get the client mode. Our reference is Alarm Client 1 dot client mode. That is an integer reference to that list of 5 selections that we had in the control object itself. So there was 5 in the list, and now we need to be able to select between the first 2 in this particular object. So I'm going to use the static values and the captions down here to be able to do that. So I need 2 entries in here that will allow me to select 2 different values, a 1 and a 2, to change that client mode between the active alarms and the recent alarms and events. Now that you can see that I put the captions in here, so this is what the operator or whoever's navigating the system, they are going to see current alarms, recent alarms, and events. That's going to be their 2 selections. So when they pick one of these, then the value either 1 or 2 is written into this client mode, and then that changes the behavior of the object itself. Now, if you remember, on our PowerPoint and in our demonstration display, we had radio buttons that were allowing us to select which filter was being applied. So I'm going to go through that process now of applying that, and I'll just show you some of the details. I want to start off and make this with something that looks really nice. We're going to have a panel that we can put in there, and we can lay the buttons on those. I will Draw my panel in here and get that to be the appropriate size. Then I'm going to add my radio buttons to that, and we'll make those take up nearly the full palette. Now we need to configure these radio buttons as well. So we need a selection of control system, production, line 1, line 2. So I need to go in and configure this to give us that functionality. In this particular case, we're needing this reference to be the alarm query because we're going to apply different filters to the alarm object itself. So we're going to filter based on control system, production, line 1, line 2. So this reference needs to be pointing at that query. So I'm going to select alarm query and OK that, and now you'll see my reference, alarm client 1 dot alarm query. So that's a different reference than we used in the other. And then I will go through and put the values in down here for what I need for the navigation. Now I have added my captions and added my queries over here. You just have to type these in. There's no place you can really go and select or pick these from a list. They pretty much have to be typed in. So we have control system, one area, production, that's another area, line 1, another area, and line 2, that's another area. Now recall back to the structure when I first came in to our development environment, I showed you how the structure was laid out. This matches up almost exactly to how that structure was laid out. There's a couple of the alarm areas we've left out because they're not important to the demonstration. But as you want to move from alarm area to the next alarm area, this might be one of the ways you would use to navigate that is through the radio button. And then we have the corresponding query on this side. Backslash, galaxy, exclamation point, and then area. In this case, control system or production, line 1, line 2. So those match up with the areas that we want to filter on. So now that I have that configured, I want to just clean it up and make it look a little better. And I want to demonstrate some of the features and functionality that we have here in the symbol editor as well. So I want to kind of make this white background match up with the panel that I put it on so it looks more uniform. I go over to the solid area and I click on the ellipsis and I get the eyedropper, which is the color picker. And then I go pick the color of my panel and it fills in that for me. So now it looks like I've got one uniform object there where it's actually two objects, but it blends them together and makes it look very nice. We're going to go and put this on an in-touch window, and then we're going to go to runtime and we're going to test it and make sure it gets our alarm. So all we need to do now once we're finished up is save and close. We'll go through a check-in process, so it'll check it back in. And you'll see that now it's checked in and it has something there that we can use. Now that I have that symbol checked back in, I have it created and you can see the thumbnail is different now than it was. We need to go put that on an InTouch window and be able to use that at runtime. I already have InTouch open down at the bottom, so I'll open that up. We'll go to InTouch Window Maker, and I've already created a window and I have one that's already functional here, the one with the 1 after it. But we're going to build a new one. So I have a window created called ArchestrA Alarms, and I'm going to embed that symbol on it that I created. This may be new to some of you. This is the embedded ArchestrA graphics tool here. So I click on that, and that's going to take me over to my graphics toolbox. Go and select this, and remember we created Alarm Display Live. That's the first one I created there. So I'm going to choose that one. And I'm going to drop it on the screen and go out the full screen and resize. Now that's all we have to do. We've dropped it on the window. All the configuration's already embedded in it. We're going to go to runtime and we should be able to switch from active alarms to recent alarms. So you can see how it's changing. It's dynamic. I'm getting some level alarms in there from number 1 and number 2. I'm also getting some alarms from the GR platform as well. I've created some alarms based on performance, and I can select just recent alarms. So I get a lot more of those. As you can see now, we have many alarms and many events in the display viewer. So there's much more information there, more things that we have to filter through. And you'll see as we slide across, there's other alarm and limits that we can look at. We can see what node it came from, what galaxy it came from. You can also see that it came from the GR platform or the engine. Those are events that we might be looking at. We can also see the type of alarm that it might be. So GR platform status, write successful. Now that we do have the alarms in, though, there's no filters being applied at this point, so we can come back and apply filters now. So you'll see a lot of these go away. If we look at just the control system, it's only going to show us the things from, so those events were coming from the platform or the engine. But if we go to production, you'll see a bit of a change there. So now you have these events and alarms mixed in with those. We narrow it down to line 1. We'll have even fewer events. And then line 2, we'll have a different set of alarms and events that we can look at. So it appears to function quite well. We can narrow it down to just the current alarms. Those are active alarms only. Or we can look at the alarms and events. And you see we get a lot more information with that. So now that's the active portion of the alarms. So we have the active alarms and the recent events. So now we need to go and configure another object like this so we can show the historical alarms and events. Okay, I'm back at my graphical toolbox and I'm going to configure this historical alarm symbol now. We're going to build that. So you can see it's just a blank canvas. When I hover over it, nothing comes up. So we need to build that into a display that does our historical alarms for us. So once again, we're going to use that same object, that alarm control or alarm client in this particular case. I'll double click that, drop it on the screen, resize it, and I'll go in and configure it. This time it's going to be slightly different. We're going to want a historical alarms, and the configuration is different for historical alarms because remember, now we have to connect to a database. So with a database, you need to know what server the database is on. You need to know what database is actually in that server, and then you have to know how you're going to connect to it as far as security, username, password, things like that. In our case, we're going to use Windows Integrated Security, so the user that I'm logged onto the machine with will provide my credentials to log into the database. I want to log into this same machine because the database is on this machine as well. So that happens to be InSource TRN19. We already have a database that's created on that server, and it's called WWALMDB. So that database has already been created. We're going to use Windows Authentication to connect to it, and we should be able to test the connection, and it did succeed. So it was a successful connection, so we have the correct information in there. Some of the things I didn't show you in the other client object was the colors. You can go through and configure the colors. So we have colors for different priorities, whether it's acknowledged or unacknowledged. We have colors for events. We have colors for it returning to normal, the header colors, the grid colors, the window color. So you can configure just about any color that's a part of the system and have it to change on the alarm display. So you can come up with your very own scheme and make it look the way you'd like to. Customize it to your use. Along with the colors, other things can be configured and customized as well. The columns, so you see all the columns that are available and how they're sorted. They can be sorted by different column orders. We can also have some query filters built in, and as we configure those, it'll show up in here, and we can also have some favorite queries. There's also a time selection, how you would like to see the time. You can also control the runtime behavior of the grid being turned on, showing the grid, how it scrolls up and down, whether the alarms come in at the bottom or the top, and all the different menu selections that you have there. There's also data bindings. So what that means is these are attributes that are part of the object, and you can associate other references to those so you can interact with it at runtime. So these are bidirectional. They'll read and write from this particular reference. And then these are outputs, so they can only be monitored. So we have some that are input-output and some that are only output. And then we could also have events that are associated with this as well. Some logic that we could look for a particular event and then have something happen once that event has occurred. Okay, so this is configured now. We can complete this. We can say OK, and now that is configured. Now for our navigation, we need another combo box. So we'll create that. And just like we did before, we need this one associated with the query. And I'll go down and find that and select it. And then remember, we had 3 historical selections. We could just look at historical alarms by themselves. We could look at historical events by themselves. And then we could look at alarms and events historically together. I have my captions in there now for historical alarms, historical events, historical alarms and events. And remember, we had 3 selections left because we used 1 and 2 with our active alarms. So we have values 3, 4, and 5 left. So as we make our selection on the captions, it'll write into our client mode, and it will change the operation of that client control that we're using. Okay, now we're ready to save this and test it at runtime. I'm now back in InTouch Window Maker, so now I need to embed my second object that I created. So I go to Embed ArchestrA Graphic, and the historical alarm is the second one that I created. So OK that. I drop it on the window, go out to full screen and resize it. Now we're ready to test our historical functionality. Go to Runtime, and you'll see we have many alarms in there. These are all historical alarms. And if we look at the date time information, you can see how they're chronologically ordered as well. And you can see the different columns of data, the class of alarms, the priorities, the name of the alarm, the group. Then we can also see just the events. So only if the event class shows up. You can see those, and you can scroll through those, see all the columns of data for that. Once again, these are coming from the historical alarm database. So those are just the events, and then we can see alarms and events together. Now, one other thing that I didn't show you as far as configuration, but it also is very important to this working properly, is the Alarm DB. So if I go down here, I already have the Alarm DB running, and it's down here on my toolbar. And if I click on that, it'll bring this interface up. So I definitely wanted to show you that. And the way I get that started is Start, Programs, One-to-Wear, InTouch, and it shows up there. So I can click on the Alarm DB logger from here and get it started. I happen to already have mine started, so I was putting alarms in the database during the whole demo, so we'd have information to look at. So it's up and running now. The only button I have to click on is the stop button. So if I stop, then I can go into the settings. And in this case, the server name could be local in this case, or it could be whatever server's running the database. So just like when we used our client control to connect to the database, the same process takes place here. We need a server that we can connect to, we need a database that's on that server, and then we need the credentials to be able to log into that database. So I'm using the local, or I could use InSource TRN19 as the server name that I'm using. My database stays the same, www.almdb. My credentials here in this case, I'm using the SA password and blank. And we also, once we're connected to it, and I'll test the connection, so it succeeded, we could create that database or a database with any name that we prefer. And you can also delete the database here if you want as well. There are two different choices here for logging mode. There's the details and there's consolidated. Most everyone uses the consolidated, and that works well for them. But the detailed will increase the size of your database. Next, we have these alarm queries that we built to put in here to be able to go and get the alarms from the areas. They're just like what we were using in the alarm control. Only difference here is we're putting the node name in front of those. So we have InSource TRN is the server name, Galaxy, exclamation point, control system, discharge, intake, and production. So you see those are a little bit different than what we built in the client control itself. And then we can also set the priority. What priority of alarms do we want? In this case, we're getting from 1 to 999, and that's the full range. And if you want to get events in here as well, the events are at 999 on priority, so you have to have that included to be able to get the events, to set that priority to 999. And then the final configuration here, we can run this as a service, so it could be a Windows service that starts up and stops as we boot up the system or as the operating system comes up, or we can run it as a normal application, which I'm doing here. And then we have a choice to log the events or not to log the events. And there again, two criteria. That has to be checked, and your priorities have to be set to up to at least 999 to be able to get the events. And then it's going and checking with the platform every 100 milliseconds to get the alarm information, and it gets that information from the platform itself, and then it puts those alarms into the database so we can query them with the historian tool. We're finished now, and I'll go ahead and start this back up, and as I start it up, you'll be able to see the alarm cache here built up some alarms while I had it offline. So it buffers those alarms, and then once I restart it, it'll pass that buffered information into the database. So you'll see this jump up to some large number, maybe like 400. Okay, so it went up into the high 300s, and it works through those and puts those alarms into the database, and it quickly cleans out the cache. It's empty now. So it'll be working as the cache fills up with alarms, or one or two at a time go in there. It will move those through every 100 milliseconds into the database. Okay, so that concludes my demonstration. I hope that was helpful to you. We've got the alarm logger collecting alarms for the historical, and then these are active alarms, and we've built that all into one screen so we can filter. So basically you can see alarms and events from any of the areas that you'd like to see those, and then we can see historical alarms and events. And once again, we could filter those as well. So I hope that helps. Thank you very much for your time.